Isn't it true that sometimes you just want to vanish? Would you like to break free from the routine and discover the serenity of floating into a sunset? And if you ask Jose Salvador Alvarenga, he could well tell you, that's not all it seems to be. During his lifetime, Alvarenga experienced the grave misfortune of becoming lost on the vast expanse of the deep blue. Everyone has been fascinated by tales of individuals going missing at sea, but he took it to a whole new level. He vanished off the coast of Costa Azul, Mexico, and didn't come back until 438 days later, exceptionally vibrant. Although Alvarenga is a real person, the terrifying story has the tone of a Pacific island legend. Over the course of more than 14 months at sea, he relied on his instincts and creativity to help him survive, battling dehydration and a decline in his mental faculties. For how many days can a typical adult go without drinking water? At most, this is a rough estimate. It takes only a few hours for someone to die from dehydration when exerting themselves in a hot setting, according to Randall K. Packer, a biology professor at George Washington University. The fact that Alvarenga made it through 438 days without H2O, sometimes consuming only his urine while fighting off the weather and exhaustion, is almost astounding, even though he may have been in the cooler November air. You could be asking if it's safe to drink pee in a survival scenario. Doing so is foolish. A research study published in the Journal of Clinical Microbiology found that human urine contains a combination of water, salt, chloride, and more than 85 distinct bacterial species. The only way for a sailor to stay hydrated is for it to rain occasionally, since drinking urine is almost like drinking seawater. Venturing into the ocean poses several risks, one of which is dehydration. The contemporary Robinson Crusoe faced the perilous perfect storm, hypothermia brought on by the combination of wet clothing and the freezing night air. He was about to die of thirst and, as you'll see, from madness. Even so, this El Salvadorian fisherman, 36 years old at the time, survived the ordeal of traveling 6,700 kilometers without a lifeline. Alvarenga first set sail on November 17, 2012, leaving little behind. Estranged from his parents for 8 years and having relinquished custody of his daughter to them, he looked to have nothing but the ocean. As a professional fisherman, he was well versed in the hazards of the job, having worked with Villarmino Rodriguez for 4 years. Nothing, however, could have foretold the horrors that lay ahead. Alvarenga's friend Ray Perez declined to include Ezequiel Cordoba, a 24-year-old novice, on board. They anticipated a 30-hour journey. Confident in their plan, they didn't double-check their gear, assuming there would be no rain and few obstacles. Due to their arrogance, they ended up with a waterproof GPS and half-empty radio batteries. What came next was in sharp contrast to the start. The modest fishing excursion made a tidy profit, reeling in more than 1,000 pounds of fish. However, a devastating and unplanned storm arrived shortly after they set out on their journey. Seawater swamped their 25-foot yacht, causing damage as the two battled against the high seas. There was a detour. The expert fisherman remained resolute, but his inexperienced shipmate was terrified. He froze in fear, panicking at the mere mention of sharks. Alvarenga remained level-headed despite his cries. He saw land in the distance and proceeded toward an area of clear sky. Resilience ensued. He radioed his employer while taking a break. The conversation didn't last long, but it set in motion a rescue mission, one that should have brought them back to safety. In fact, it had been almost 430 days since anyone had heard from Alvarenga. Minimal respite followed. The waves pounded relentlessly, tossing the boat in all directions. The boat nearly sank. In a desperate attempt to lighten their load, Alvarenga ordered the release of their massive catch. The ice and extra gas followed. It wasn't enough. Captain MacGyver skillfully combined 50 buoys to form a makeshift drag, providing the ship with some stability in the absence of an anchor. But the more they struggled, the stronger Mother Nature pushed back. The engine stopped working. There was no GPS signal. The radio was unresponsive. Each setback worsened the situation, causing the once calm skipper to lose his composure. In a fit of rage, he clobbered the dead engine and hurled all the worthless gear overboard, letting the sea swallow them whole. To find refuge from the biting cold and unrelenting rain, the sailors turned over the massive icebox. Collapsing into a tight ball, they fought for warmth. Dipping their feet into the seawater, and rain pooled at their feet. Amidst the mayhem of the tempest, they sank farther out to sea. With no way to gauge distance, Disaster struck. They found themselves lost. Their doom might have been inevitable had Alvarenga not been an expert. He was an expert, bare-handed fisherman. All he needed was to keep his hands still and slightly apart so that a fish might swim under them. His clamp-down reflex kicked in the moment something touched the scales, and he dug his fingernails into them. Although it wasn't flawless, it successfully completed the task. They subsisted on the fish he caught, which Cordoba dried in the sun, as well as the infrequent turtle that swam too near or an ill-starred flying fish. After a few days without water, Alvarenga developed an unsettling habit, drinking his own pee. In an effort to control his hunger, he bit his fingernails and swallowed whole jellyfish despite the painful sensation. 2 weeks after they embarked, they experienced their first good luck. From her vantage point inside the icebox, Alvarenga noticed the clouds growing darker and the rain tapping on the glass. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had built a simple system for collecting rainwater. At first, they hesitated to ration their fresh water supply, but eventually they came around. Weeks passed by, then months. The men kept on, surviving. They gathered floating bottles and containers. One day they discovered an unexpected treasure, a dangling trash bag. Inside, a clump of gum, partially spoiled milk, a cabbage head, and carrots. It was a treasure trove for those who had been subsisting on raw turtle, fish bones, seabirds, and even urine. With their fresh supplies, they had enough food to last several days. In that moment, they felt an uncommon sense of solace. Afterward, Alvarenga recalled how they talked about their mothers, expressing regret. If he had perished at sea, he would have gone nearly 10 years without speaking to his parents. However, their temporary truce did not last. Cordoba fell ill after consuming raw seabird flesh. Then he got worse. He refused to eat. His depression deepened. Even though Alvarenga showed remarkable resilience, Cordoba's health continued to deteriorate. Despondency set in. They agreed that if one died, the survivor would visit the family to share their story and say goodbye. The time for Alvarenga to act was short. Finally, one morning, Cordoba's body gave up. Desperate to help, Alvarenga offered water as he felt him slipping away. Cordoba became comatose. "Please, don't abandon me," Alvarenga pleaded. "What am I going to do here alone?" Shortly after, Cordoba went limp. They had been complete strangers when they set out on this journey, but Alvarenga had come to cherish the companion he had gained in hardship. In his mind, Cordoba had died. Still, he refused to let him go. For 6 days, the sole survivor conversed with the corpse. He asked how it slept. If only it had been eaten. Alvarenga didn't understand what he was doing until a moonlit night. Contrary to what others believed, he laid Cordoba to rest at sea, giving him a proper burial. The sailor pressed on, burdened with deep-seated guilt over Cordoba's death. Thoughts of suicide lingered, but Alvarenga was certain that doing so would exclude him from paradise. Believing his suffering would eventually end, he continued on alone. At dawn and dusk, he scanned the horizon, searching for the silhouette of a distant ship. Countless times he saw container ships. Countless times he mustered the strength to leap and wave wildly. Regardless, the ships always moved forward, oblivious to the wayward passenger. With no one to speak to, Alvarenga indulged in his fantasies. His imagination became his shield, a portal to a world where he could feel every detail. Each morning, he would walk the deck, envisioning himself strolling through faraway lands. These parallel universes distracted him until he experienced the most profound delusion of his life. An island's outline became visible through the slightly hazy Pacific. Hallucinations, he knew, never lasted. But by this point, he was accustomed to seeing things. The more he stared, the more he convinced himself if this was real, he had to ensure his boat drifted toward it. He hurriedly made his way across the deck, severing the buoys that trailed behind him in an effort to gain momentum. In just 1 hour, his boat reached the coast. He jumped into the water and swam to the shore of the Ebon Atoll, which he would later learn was Tile Islet. Alvarenga, delighted to finally be on solid ground, crawled naked onto the soft sand. Nearby, locals Emmy and Russell Libokmeto were crossing a tiny canal when they spotted him. Nevertheless, Emmy and Russell welcomed the frail man into their home. Alvarenga didn't know where he was. It wasn't a significant issue back then. At last, his 438-day ordeal had come to an end. But the difficulties persisted. Upon his return to land, Alvarenga was accused of cannibalism by Cordoba's family. Claiming he had devoured their relative, they sued him for $1 million. Shortly after hearing news of the lawsuit, he secured a book deal for Jonathan Franklin's 438 Days, an extraordinary true story of survival at sea. However, not all of Cordoba's relatives turned against him. Following his recovery, Alvarenga fulfilled his promise to the young man's mother, traveling to Mexico just as they had agreed. And the lawsuit? Nothing came of it. Nobody ever forgets the tragedy Alvarenga endured. However, he resolutely refused to let it define him. Rumors circulated in 2015 that he still hoped to revive his fishing career.